Boeing Starliner spacecraft has successfully landed in the New Mexico desert. The capsule traveled back to Earth from the International Space Station.
What actually happened to the Boeing Starliner left many people stunned in the summer of 2024. The mission that started with high hopes ended in failure, as the spacecraft left two astronauts stranded in space. Headlines around the world focused on the disaster, but there's much more to the story than just a broken spacecraft. Could there be deeper issues within NASA and the space industry? Join us as we uncover the truth behind the Boeing Starliner's unexpected failure, the company that built rockets for the moon. Let's dive into the fascinating story of Boeing, a big name in the aerospace industry. Everyone knows Boeing, right? It's that giant company that's been involved in everything from building parts of rockets that went to the moon to crafting the planes we fly in. Initially, when NASA chose Boeing to take a leading role in space travel, it seemed like they were making a smart choice. Until then, Boeing had a solid reputation as a dependable innovator. They were the brains behind the first stage booster of the Saturn V, the moon rocket, and even put together the lunar rover that astronauts drove around on the moon. Plus, they played a big part in building the space shuttle orbiters and the American modules on the International Space Station. They also developed the Delta IV rocket and had a long track record of making military and commercial planes. But what if I told you that Boeing's long-standing reputation was about to face its biggest test yet? Something happened that would shake the company's image to its core, and it's a story you won't want to miss. But then, in 1997, something big happened. Boeing decided to buy another aircraft manufacturer called McDonnell Douglas, and this deal was huge. It cost $14 billion. But the price tag wasn't the only big thing about this deal. It kind of changed the heart of Boeing. Before this, Boeing was known as a place where engineers were in charge. It was all about making great planes with safety as the top priority. After the merger, things started to shift. The new culture was more about making money and keeping shareholders happy, which meant cutting costs became more important than maintaining their reputation for quality. Now let's talk about one of Boeing's latest projects, the Starliner spacecraft. This new spacecraft, which started being put together around 15 years ago, around 2010, is part of NASA's plan to keep sending humans and supplies to space. The cool thing about the Starliner is that it's designed to fly by itself, although it also has manual controls just in case. It was built to replace the old space shuttles and help carry people and gear to the International Space Station. The Starliner is pretty high-tech, with 52 nozzles that help control its movements in space. There are 28 small thrusters for minor adjustments and 20 more powerful ones for bigger moves. Plus, it has 4 big engines for emergencies that can push it away from its rocket booster during liftoff. Let's not forget the human side of this story. Meet Barry Butch Wilmore and Sunita Suni Williams, two of NASA's top astronauts. These two are no strangers to space and tough situations. Suni has been to space twice, spending a total of 322 days up there and doing over 50 hours of spacewalks. Before joining NASA, she was a Navy diver and flew combat helicopters. Butch is also a Navy vet with experience flying combat missions. He's been to space a couple of times too, including piloting the Space Shuttle Atlantis. They were chosen for one of the first missions on the Starliner, which says a lot about their skills and bravery. To wrap this up, let's look at how all this got started. Boeing got their first chunk of money, $18 million, from NASA back in 2010 to start working on the Starliner. This was just the beginning. Over the next few years, they received more funding, $92 million, $460 million, and $10 million in different rounds, to keep the project moving at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. This is where they used to take care of the space shuttles, so it's got a lot of history. Boeing was hopeful that the Starliner would be ready to go by 2015, as long as the cash kept coming. This funding and support were essential for turning their plans into a real spacecraft that could soon be part of more space adventures. But when two big companies came together, the focus seemed to shift, with money becoming a bigger priority over the safety and quality Boeing was known for. Boeing's big plan with NASA's Starliner. Boeing's leaders were pretty confident everything was on track. They had been dipping into a steady flow of government cash thanks to a big-time NASA contract. They even had their lobbyists working overtime to make sure NASA would give them the entire contract all to themselves. They argued that they needed all the money to develop their new spaceship, Starliner, properly. Most folks at NASA were okay with this because, well, this was Boeing. They were the ones who built the giant Saturn V rocket. What could possibly go wrong when such a powerhouse was in charge? Now let me tell you about someone you might not have heard of, William H. Gerstenmaier. At the time, he was the guy at NASA running the Human Exploration Program. He thought Starliner sounded good in theory, but he wasn't too keen on giving just one company all the power in NASA's Commercial Crew Program. He pushed for NASA to spread the wealth, so to speak, and fund two different companies to stir up some competition. In 2014, NASA came out and said Boeing and SpaceX, a newer company, would both get contracts to build their own crew vehicles. Boeing got a deal for $4.2 billion, while the new kids, SpaceX, got $2.6 billion for their Crew Dragon project. According to NASA's plan, each company had to pass a bunch of tests to get all their contract money. They needed to do an abort test, send their craft up without anyone inside, then with crew, and finally pull off 6 missions with astronauts to the International Space Station. By 2015, Starliner was behind schedule. Its unmanned test flight didn't happen until 2017, and then it got pushed back again and again, all the way to 2019. Boeing was used to a kind of funding where they just billed the government for whatever they spent, plus a little extra. Now with a fixed-price contract, they had to watch every dollar because it affected their profits. This was new territory for them, and it was tough adjusting to not just spending money without worrying about the cost. In December of 2019, the big day came, and Boeing's Starliner was launched on an Atlas V rocket, heading straight for space. But right off the bat, things didn't go as planned. There was a problem with the mission clock. It was off by 11 hours. Because of this, when Starliner tried to figure out what to do next, it missed the time to fire its thrusters to catch up to the International Space Station and just kind of floated around aimlessly. This mix-up meant it used up too much fuel and didn't have enough left to safely link up with the station. It turned out to be a good thing that there were delays on this first trip because just 2 hours before it was supposed to head back to Earth, Boeing found a software mistake. This bug would have made the Starliner's thrusters fire all wrong, which could have made the crew module and the service module smash into each other and either blow up or spin out of control back into the atmosphere. NASA ended up calling this a highly visible close call, but luckily the capsule made it back to Earth without any crew and was safe. Once it landed, astronaut Sunita Williams named it Calypso. Funny enough, in Homer's Odyssey, Calypso is the character who keeps Odysseus from getting home. And Calypso music, that's where musicians make up the lyrics as they go. The issues with Starliner weren't just about some bugs in the software. Even before this mess, there were major hiccups with its engines that didn't get much attention. In 2018, Boeing did a test where they fired up the engines meant to save the crew if something went wrong. The test itself went fine, but afterwards a bunch of fuel valves didn't close right, and tons of dangerous fuel spilled out and caught fire. Despite their history of building some of the most famous rockets and engines, Boeing and their engine supplier, Aerojet Rocketdyne, really dropped the ball here. The first attempt didn't go as planned, but Boeing's engineers were now working hard to fix the problems and get the Starliner back on track. Boeing's Starliner hits trouble again. By 2021, Boeing was ready to give Starliner another shot. They had spent 2 years fixing the software, and it was time to see if it all paid off. But then right as they were about to launch, a whole new problem popped up. 13 of the fuel valves in the propulsion system weren't working right. They tried to fix them on the launch pad, but no luck. They even rolled the rocket back to try fixing it again, but still nothing. It turned out the valves got stuck because they had rusted shut from moisture mixing with the fuel. Boeing pointed fingers at Aerojet Rocketdyne for bad hardware, and Aerojet Rocketdyne blamed Boeing for bad communication and not paying their bills on time. So there they were, two of the biggest names in spaceflight, acting like kids fighting over a toy, unable to even send an empty capsule into low Earth orbit without trouble. Looking back on the events, it's clear things took an unexpected turn, though there were hints for those paying close attention. In 2014, NASA chose 4 veteran astronauts, Bob Behnken, Eric Boe, Doug Hurley, and Sunita Williams, to help guide the development of spacecrafts with Boeing and SpaceX. Doug Hurley noticed a big difference in how the two companies worked. SpaceX's team was all about teamwork, really valuing the astronauts' feedback and working closely with them. On the other hand, the Boeing engineers didn't seem to care much, appearing dismissive and overly confident, and even failed to mention a significant propellant leak during testing. Because of this, Hurley decided he wouldn't fly with Boeing's Starliner and expressed his concerns to the head of the astronaut office. Later on, Doug and Bob would command the very first manned mission of SpaceX Crew Dragon in 2020, which was a successful trip to the International Space Station and back. 2 years later, in May 2022, the Starliner was on the launch pad again. The rocket did its job well and put the Starliner into orbit. But just like before, there were some issues. Two of the spacecraft's thrusters didn't work as they should during the crucial moments of entering orbit. Thankfully, the Starliner had lots of backup thrusters, so this wasn't a deal breaker. Other thrusters stepped in to help. However, there were more problems when some other thrusters failed while trying to dock with the International Space Station. The cause? Low pressure in the thruster's combustion chamber. Despite these hiccups, the Starliner managed to dock with the ISS. Things weren't perfect, but they were okay. Now let's jump to May 2024. The Starliner is back on the launch pad, this time with Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams inside. They're sitting in the same capsule Suni had named Calypso years ago, ready for a test flight. They know there are things about their ship that might not work perfectly. But the launch doesn't happen. It was called off because of a problem with an oxygen valve in the rocket, which turned out to be a lucky break because it led to the discovery of a helium gas leak in the Starliner's service module, pushing the launch back even further. A month later, by June 1st, Butch and Suni were ready to go again. But a computer issue with the ground system caused another delay. On June 5th, they tried once more. This time, they had a lot on their plate. Their mission involved rigorously testing the spacecraft's ability to move and stabilize itself in space. They had to keep firing the thrusters, checking to see how well they were working. This intense testing wore out 5 of the thrusters, which were then considered damaged. And then guess what? The helium started leaking again. So why is helium so important on a spacecraft? It's all about managing the pressure that moves fuel into the engines. Starliner's engines use a type of fuel that lights up on its own when mixed, needing precise pressure to work right. Helium, which is super light and doesn't react with other materials, is perfect for this job. But it's also so light that it can slip out of almost any container. Think of how a helium balloon slowly deflates after a party. After facing so many delays, Boeing found itself in a tough spot, with the next steps critical to proving the Starliner's ability to complete its mission. How Boeing saved the Starliner in orbit. Initially, losing a thruster or two didn't seem too critical because of all the backups. But when 5 thrusters failed, things got tricky, especially since they were all on the back of the Starliner. This left the spacecraft briefly out of reach from the ISS, with Butch and Suni waiting to see if they could even continue. For a while, it looked like they might be stuck without a way to safely approach or return. Luckily, engineers on the ground managed to fix 4 of the thrusters remotely, allowing the Starliner to dock successfully with the ISS. Despite the bumps along the way, the mission moved forward under test conditions, with everyone knowing to expect the unexpected. The plan was for an 8-day mission, though delays from other space activities and additional tests extended this timeline slightly. These were minor setbacks in the grand scheme, highlighting the complex and challenging nature of sending humans into space. After going through all the information from the flight computers, Boeing's team still couldn't figure out why the thruster system stopped working right as they were getting close to the space station and then suddenly started working again when it was time to dock. What they did know was that at a critical moment, the thrusters weren't giving as much power as they were supposed to, which made the computer really worried and caused it to turn them off. Hoping to understand more about what went wrong, astronauts Butch and Suni went back to the spacecraft called Starliner to do a special test. They tested 7 out of 8 thrusters on the back of the spacecraft to see how well they were working. This test gave them more details, but still didn't solve the problem completely. Due to the unresolved issues, Boeing and NASA chose to delay the return trip of the Starliner spacecraft a bit more. They organized a specific testing zone on Earth to thoroughly examine the same model of thruster used on the Starliner, hoping to recreate the problem they encountered in space. The team planned a series of test burns, aiming to understand and perhaps replicate the malfunction under controlled conditions. This detailed examination was expected to stretch over a few weeks, indicating that astronauts Butch and Suni would remain in space at least until the end of July. While they were up there, rumors circulated about the astronauts being stuck on the International Space Station. However, preparations for such an extended stay had been made in advance. Extra resources, including additional food and supplies, were stocked for the added crew members, ensuring they had enough to keep them sustained and occupied. Both astronauts kept busy, undertaking various tasks like repairs, scientific research, and communicating with Earth through press conferences to reassure everyone that they were doing well and in good spirits. One significant challenge Boeing faced was linked to the malfunctioning components located within the service module of the Starliner. This particular section of the spacecraft is designed not to return to Earth, but to disintegrate in the atmosphere upon re-entry. Once it's destroyed, any opportunity for Boeing to physically inspect and diagnose those specific parts vanishes. This lack of direct access to the problematic components meant that even though the exact nature of the issue remained unknown, determining whether the Starliner could perform critical maneuvers for a safe return was complicated. Despite these uncertainties, Boeing continued to assure the media and the public that the spacecraft was operational and posed no risk. They maintained that they had the capability to bring Butch and Suni back to Earth whenever necessary, but they preferred to extend their stay in orbit. By doing so, they aimed to collect more data and conduct further analyses, ensuring that all safety measures were thoroughly vetted and in place for when the astronauts would eventually make their travel back to Earth. This cautious approach highlighted their commitment to astronaut safety and mission success, even if it meant facing public scrutiny and dealing with logistical challenges during the extended space stay. Is the Boeing Starliner's failure just a technical glitch? Or could there be hidden problems within NASA and the space industry that no one is talking about? Could there be more going on behind the scenes than we realize? Tell us what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.